This is coming in from Mark Nixon, who gives us a warning from the Bank of Canada. And when you get a warning from the Bank of Canada, it doesn't sound like they're giving away like free pencils. It sounds like serious blank. So he says, warning from the Bank of Canada, 60% of Canadians will face much higher mortgage rates over the next 12 months. Job losses could spike, defaults may surge, liquidity could dry up, making credit hard to access. When the Bank of Canada provides a warning, this could get ugly. So here is the starch warning that the Bank of Canada is now saying to Canadians in 2025, almost halfway through May. Even though we know that Canada is turning downhill, it's absolutely almost hitting rock bottom at this point, where 2 million people a month are lining up at food banks. We showed you the Toronto Star article where 300 plus Canadians a day are filing bankruptcy because they can't meet their finances. And things are not looking good for this country. Things are not looking good. No matter how much you scream elbows up, Canada's in deep, dark turmoil, and here's proof of it.
12 months, particularly in households without a mortgage. For example, the share of these households that are behind on credit card or auto loan payments has continued to go up. Among households with a mortgage, about 60% are facing renewal this year or next. Most of those renewing will see their payments rise because they took out their mortgage during the pandemic when rates were at historic lows. But the average increase in payment will be smaller than we expected a year ago. Still, if a large shock causes job losses, it'll be harder for some households to keep up with their debt payments. A prolonged trade war may be that shock. It would cause demand for Canadian exports to fall. It would disrupt supply chains, threatening jobs and incomes.
But if we all get together in our town squares, respectively, wear a bunch of red, and start doing the chicken dance like we were told in the mainstream media, everything's fine. Everything's fine. It's all that Donald Trump and Elon Musk fault. Oh, wait. Donald Trump is not in charge of the Bank of Canada. You know who was in charge of the Bank of Canada? Our now elected prime minister. Or should I say selected? Our selected prime minister was in charge of the Bank of Canada during this fiasco that now, in 2025, we're finding out, yeah, this country is screwed. So, forget elbows up. It's now brace yourself and really start understanding how screwed this country is. Not because of foreign dignitaries or other presidents or prime ministers around the nation giving tariffs, but more so on the fact that Canada, our leadership, our Bank of Canada, all these institutions have lied to you, have gaslit you, have just absolutely shot themselves in the foot. And now they are bleeding out dry and telling you that you just got to brace yourself. You just got to deal with this. And I bet you none of them are ever going to be held to account. None of these people are going to be held to account. So there's more to this.
Workers in trade-dependent industries could find it particularly difficult to continue managing their debt. A prolonged trade war would also matter for businesses. Most Canadian businesses have managed to adjust to past interest rate increases, and the surge in small business insolvencies last year proved to be temporary. But businesses in trade-related sectors, especially those with high debt, low profitability, or cash reserves, could also fall behind on debt payments. But if credit losses occur on a large enough scale, banks could cut back on lending in response. Struggling households and businesses would then have less access to credit to get through tough times. This cycle could exacerbate the economic downturn. In the non-bank financial sector, the growing presence of hedge funds in the market for Government of Canada bonds raises some concerns. Government bond markets are the foundation of the financial system, and they need to function smoothly for all other markets to work well. The increased activity by hedge funds has helped absorb increased issuance of government debt, keeping yields lower and liquidity higher. But hedge funds have also taken on increasingly large amounts of leverage to fund their purchase of government bonds. And this makes them more likely to pull back from these crucial markets in periods of stress, introducing added volatility. The recent gyrations in the US Treasury market clearly illustrated this risk. If the trade war causes a larger spike in volatility than we've seen so far, leveraged hedge funds might rush to sell their holdings. That could strain liquidity across core markets, increasing stress throughout the financial system.
There you go, folks. And all they're telling you is just deal with it. Brace yourself. It's just coming. That's the fact. And there's nothing we can do, even though we're the highest institution in finances in this country. There's just nothing we can do. But thank God we took your tax dollars and sent it off to Bangladesh and more off to Ukraine and serving the needs of the worldwide, even though the worldwide doesn't need really our financial givings. Thank God we're bleeding this country dry to serve our, neo-Nazi friends in Ukraine. Thank God we're draining this country dry to serve the needs of, sexual orientation and gender studies in third world nations. Thank God. Thank God. Because I was worried about that. I was worried that people in, Taiwan and Bangladesh and Uzbekistan aren't going to know the thrills of gender neutral bathrooms. Even though we're telling our veterans and young people that we can't do anything for you. You're screwed. So here, this guy Vesper breaks this down. And I didn't even know about this. I have no idea about this until now. That's how completely in the dark they have kept this for so long. They kept this in secrecy. They don't want Canadians to know about this. Because if Canadians knew about this, just like what we saw with the RCMP report, if Canadians knew how screwed they were and how much their government just neglects them, there'll be a full-out riot. There'll be a full-out shutdown from coast to coast, not just Alberta. So this guy Vesper says the Trudeau government issued billions in bonds to banks, which in turn sold them back to the Bank of Canada. The bank then returned the settlement balances, fake money, to the banks and Liberal government, flooding the economy with new money and causing the inflationary crisis. And he has this little graph here, this little infograph, where the Canadian government gives bonds to the bank gives bonds to the Bank of Canada, and then it comes back in settlement balances, and it's just this never-ending cycle that doesn't flourish the economy, doesn't get to us, it just flourishes them. Which, understandably, I'm not an economist, I'm not a financial expert, but from what I understand, inflation is due to the fact that we have ever printing money that's not chasing goods. And when that happens, you have inflation crisis, which we have right now. They avoided requesting a loan and used Section 18C to grant themselves more money, a non-loan loan with no cap, gaming the system for liquidity. The Trudeau government and Bank of Canada created this inflationary crisis. Don't believe the Liberals or Bank of Canada when they deny responsibility for inflation. Yeah, you notice how in that statement, that woman there didn't say, hey, it was kind of our wrongdoing. We feel some responsibility. We screwed up. Maybe we should, fix our ways. You notice how that didn't appear in that statement. It was just, oh, you guys are going to have to deal with high mortgages. You're going to have to deal with more inflation. You're going to have to deal with job losses. Too bad. Too bad, so sad. Just deal with it. That's the Bank of Canada for you. So this is their breakdown on their website about what's coming ahead and why we're in this situation, why they released that warning, and what is the future here in Canada for, looking for people. So it says Canada's financial system is resilient. Overall, households, businesses, banks, and non-bank financial intermediaries successfully weathered the pandemic, a period of elevated inflation and sharp increases in interest rates. Over the past 12 months, Canadian households have been carrying on an average less debt relative to their income, and insolvency filings by businesses have dropped significantly. But there are pockets of financial stress. The economic impacts of the pandemic, as well as elevated housing prices due to the persistent imbalances in the housing market, have led to higher levels of debt for some households and businesses. This has made them more vulnerable to financial shocks. Because Canadian households and businesses have remained resilient overall, financial institutions have not come under stress. Canadian banks have generally maintained elevated capital buffers and have increased provisions for credit losses. Liquidity levels have remained high, and access to funding has continued to be strong. So they're basically saying that, hey, you guys weathered the storm during the pandemic. You know, when we told everybody to shut everything down, you may lose your job, but we're going to pay you some sum of money through SERP that may or may not get to you. Hey, if you have a small business, you're going to have to shut that down, lose your livelihood, trap yourself inside. But the Bank of Canada didn't lose their jobs. Bay Street, which is our version of Wall Street here in Canada, they didn't lose their jobs. The Canadian Parliament didn't lose their jobs. In fact, throughout the pandemic, while people were on the streets wondering what the hell to do next, if they're going to be able to afford a hot meal, politicians are able to give themselves a pay raise during the pandemic, telling us to shut everything down. Recently, large and abrupt shifts in the direction of U.S. trade policy have led to some bouts of extreme market volatility, including in the normally low-risk market for U.S. Treasuries. This volatility tested the resilience of market participants, particularly non-bank financial intermediaries deploying arbitrary strategies in the U.S. Treasury market. The trade war currently threatens the Canadian economy and poses a risk to financial stability. Near-term unpredictability of U.S. trade and economic policy could cause further market volatility and a sharp repricing in assets, leading to strains on liquidity. In extreme circumstances, market volatility could turn into a market dysfunction. So isn't it good that they're telling us now, even though it's kind of already looking that way? I mean, you don't have to be an economist. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out that here in Canada, things are going downward. We know about, we're at the lowest point in our GDP. The economy is not growing. Jobs are being scarce. It's absolutely a nightmare. People can't afford the basic necessities like groceries. So we already know about this, but thank God, in May 2025, now the Bank of Canada says, yeah, you're screwed. And are they going to take responsibility for this? Oh, God, no. God, no. But they're going to tell you, they're going to tell Canadians to just brace yourself, deal with it. In the medium to long term and prolonged global trade war, we could have severe economic consequences. It would reduce economic growth and increase unemployment. Some households and businesses would be unable to continue making debt payments. If household and business credit defaults were to occur on a large scale, banks could see greater losses than they have provisioned for. This could lead them to pull back on lending, potentially exacerbating economic and financial stress. And just to remind people, this is from last year, September 11, 2024. Toronto Star, when they said more than 300 Canadians filing for bankruptcy each day, as insolvency filings hit 4-year high. So this was already happening. And they blame this mostly on the pandemic, which understandably, I understand the pandemic played a lot of factor into the screw up that we're in right now. I mean, the fact that we were lied to, the fact that we were gaslit, We were bought off by the big pharmaceutical mafia, and just how devastating it is as an entire country and to the global community that we were just put into this mold, put into this this pandemic tyranny that is now, even after dealing with COVID, after we're kind of getting back to some sort of normalcy, that this is the new normal. That small businesses are going to close down, people are going to lose their jobs. There's going to be indefinite trade wars back and forth. Nothing's going to be resolved. Nobody's going to take responsibility at the higher up for screwing ourselves. And Canadians are going to have to deal with this. That's what the Bank of Canada is warning you, that you just got to deal with it. And again, nobody's going to take responsibility. Not the Bank of Canada, not politicians, none of them. So this guy, Marty up north, unacceptable fact checker, he says, today is May 12th, and the Bank of Canada still has not published its annual report for 2024. Interesting. How bad are the losses? I'm predicting at least $2 billion of taxpayer-funded money. And he shows a screen grab. This is from their website, and you can see there's the annual report for 2023. There's 22. Where's 2024? And that's after the pandemic. That's after the lockdowns. That was just last year. Why wouldn't they release the reports? Why wouldn't they release statements? Just like how Chrystia Freeland, who was Justin Trudeau's economic advisor and financial minister, was supposed to release the fall economic statement in Canada last year, and she decided that was the perfect time to resign. That was the perfect time to call it quits, resign from the post, and pass it off to somebody else. It was like a game of hot potato. I don't want to be blamed for the debt, so I'm going to pass it off to someone else. No, you take it. No, you take it. No, you read the economic statement. No, you. No, you. And all it proved that this government, that the Bank of Canada, and just this entire system has dried up this country so harshly that we are going absolutely backwards. We're turning ourselves far beyond a third world nation the way this is going. And again, none of these people are going to be held to account. None of them. So here's Vesper again, pointing to this incident. This is the Bank of Canada violated the Bank of Canada Act, Section 18J, illegally in 2020 and 2021 by colluding and lending the Trudeau government 3 times the legal limit of 33% written into the act created by Parliament through digital money printing. They gave Justin Trudeau $400 billion. They printed $400 billion right to Justin Trudeau's hands, violating laws, violating ethics codes, violating the laws established by Parliament. They went behind the backs of Canadians, behind the backs of everybody in this country to give Justin Trudeau $400 billion in printed money. And now you understand why going to a grocery store and getting a loaf of bread is costing you $5 now. Because of this high inflation, also carbon taxes and everything else. But mostly because of this. Because when you print so much money and it doesn't chase goods, it doesn't react to the economy, you don't invest back into your people, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. So here's Pierre Poilievre. Back in the heyday, back when he had his glasses on. This is the Pierre Poilievre that I used to actually give credit to. He's like the reverse Clark Kent. Isn't it interesting? He has more superpowers when he has his glasses on. Because here's Pierre Poilievre smacking Justin Trudeau for this report, how the Bank of Canada illegally colluded with this government to just handprint $400 billion under the nose of Canadians. Listen to this.
I stumbled on a section of the Bank of Canada Act, Section 18, subsection J, only hours before I was originally planning to make this point of privilege. And having read that section and looked at the numbers, I came to the conclusion that there very well might be a breach of law involved in what the bank and the government have colluded to do. Allow me to read the section in question. Section 18, the bank may, J, make loans to the government of Canada or the government of any province, but such loans outstanding of at any one time shall not, in the case of the government of Canada, exceed 1/3 of the estimated revenue of the government of Canada in a fiscal year.
So what that's stating is the Bank of Canada can give out a loan, but it can't go over 1/3 of the fiscal year revenue of the government of Canada. So they can only give 1/3 the loan to Justin Trudeau. But the Bank of Canada violated its own agreement, violated rulings and laws to print as much money as possible to Justin Trudeau in the tune of $400 billion. I could tell you that is not the revenue of the government of Canada for last year. I could tell you for a fact that is not our revenue. That's almost 4 times more. They're saying 3, probably 4. So the Bank of Canada violated its own rules. At the same time, they're telling Canadians to brace yourself because, oh, there's so much uncertainty, we just can't deal with any of it. So just deal with it. Starve. Go live on the streets. Go buy yourself a tent because you can't afford mortgages. You can't afford food. And, life's just going to suck and you just have to deal with it. That's from the Bank of Canada. And again, none of these people are going to be held to account. Nobody's going to be held responsible. There's no criminal trials. Nothing in this country. If Iceland or Finland or any of the Nordic countries, if their bank systems violate these laws, they would get their asses handed to by the criminal courts. In Iceland, they fired the bankers. They criminalized, they penalized the bankers that screwed over Icelanders. But here in Canada, it's okay.
I turn your attention, Mr. Speaker, to Table A14, Summary Statement of Transactions, Budget 2021. Projected revenues, $355.1 billion. So to respect Section 18J of the Bank of Canada Act, which limits the bank's ability to lend money to the government to no more than 1/3 of projected budgetary revenues, the bank would be effectively capped in its loans to the government at $118 billion. $118 billion being 1/3 of the $355 billion of projected revenues. In fact, the Bank of Canada balance sheet shows that it now holds $415 billion, almost $300 billion more than the legal cap provided in the Act. The Bank of Canada has breached limits that Parliament has imposed on its ability to lend money to the government. Now, these limits do not exist without reason. There is a reason why Parliament chose deliberately to write a section into the Bank of Canada Act limiting the amount of debt the bank could buy. Parliament foresaw that future governments might try to use the printing presses over at the bank in order to pay for spending that it could not raise through the more normal process of taxation.
Yeah, whatever happened to that Pierre Poilievre? Imagine if he said that during the debates. Imagine if he said that right to Mark Carney's face, who again was the head manager of the Bank of Canada. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada at one point. Imagine saying that right to Mark Carney's face. Hey, why did the Bank of Canada violated its own ethics laws, its own parliamentary act to fork over a bunch of money to Justin Trudeau to buy up loans, causing this inflation crisis, causing the situation that we're in right now? Imagine if Pierre Poilievre said that. But no, he decided, oh, it's better for my career to focus on Trump. It's better for my career to pledge my support to Ukraine. It's better for my career to shut up and get into line. And now look where he's at. Now look where he's at. I feel bad for what happened in Carleton. I understandably upset by the malfeasance that they were trying to do during the election. I mean, 91 candidates and cheated him out purposely. But Pierre Poilievre also did this to himself. He no doubt did this to himself. And sadly, it's the best the Conservative Party has ever got. Because who else are they going to get? They know that Toolbag, Aaron O'Toole, is useless. They know Andrew Scheer didn't win any of his support, so he's just completely out. And now they're suggesting Doug Ford. Doug Ford, the dunce of Ontario. Do you think that's going to go well? No. I can tell you for a fact, it's not going to go well. So back to Vesper. For reference, this is the BOC financial report for just 2020. The yellow highlighted parts are in millions, and it totals to $360 billion in government investment. So when they mean government investment, that doesn't sound like, hey, we're going to invest that into small businesses. That's going to go towards road construction. That's going to go towards hospitals. It's going to go towards education. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like $360 billion going towards Parliament. You know, your local representative, your member of Parliament, you get a nice Rolls Royce or a Maserati with chrome spinners, because obviously the hard work during the pandemic where they had to Zoom call every so often was exhausting for them. As opposed to the everyday Canadians just trying to survive. This is absolutely crazy, and I can't believe that this was never brought up to attention until now. Until the Bank of Canada finally came forward and said, yeah, you're screwed. They're not blaming themselves. They're not blaming the government. They're not blaming how they violate their own laws. But they're just coming front and honest and saying, you're screwed. As Canadians, you're screwed. That's insane. That's insane. That should be a red flag right there to call for all Canadians to be against this, to stand together against this crap. Because this is not your fault. It's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault within the working class of Canadians. It's the fact that the Bank of Canada screwed yourself over. And considering that Pierre Poilievre could have said this during the debate right to Mark Carney's face, is a huge misstep. Huge misstep. If he said that, holy crap, there would be such a blue wave, you would think it's a tampon commercial. Mark Carney wouldn't have a chance to explain this. But Pierre Poilievre decided to stay silent because he thought it'd be better for his career to only focus on Trump, to take the silent path and fall into line with the rest of the establishment. And look what happened to him. So here, this is from the Fraser Institute. They had this article where it says Bank of Canada missteps help fueled today's inflation. This is from April of last year. And they show a little graph here with this article. I'm not going to read all of it, but here I'm going to read this highlighted part here where it says the correlation between the quantity of money and inflation shown is not perfect, but strong enough to justify the conclusion that Canada would have avoided the inflation starting as early as 2021 had the Bank of Canada not increased the money supply. So dramatically, during the first year of the pandemic, we could have avoided this completely, actually. Understandingly, what happened during COVID and how we were lied to, how we were manipulated to be under control, to be under tyrannical control. We could avoid this completely. But now here we are in 2025 where Canadians are upset, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're on the verge of revolting. And the only reason we haven't is because A, they're being shunned out of the dark with this information. The mass amount of censorship that they don't want you to see this information. I know that's going to happen in this video. Or they're just completely brainwashed. Even if you give this information, they're going to say, well, Mark Carney is for change. Mark Carney's for change. Elbows up. He's going to go after Donald Trump. Donald Trump's not the cause of this. The Bank of Canada is the cause of this. They screwed up. And you know who was in charge of the Bank of Canada? Mark Carney. So, arguably, he needs to explain a lot of this. But he will never do that. He's never going to prosecute anybody. He's never going to hold anyone to account. There's never, ever going to be justice for this malpractice, this insanity, that they violate their own laws. So, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Bank of Canada now giving the stark warning that Canadians are just going to have to deal with the brunt of their utter insanity, their criminality, their violation of their own laws, their own ethics, their own process, and causing this inflation crisis that is now costing a burden to the rest of the country. And like I said, if more and more people understood this and more people got this soaked into their mind, forget about Trump, get out of that space for a second, and focus on the domestic abusers that are taking this country hostage. Holy crap, there would be such an uprising. And the RCMP even tells us that. The RCMP worries and tells parliamentarian that there would be an uprising if more and more Canadians knew about this. But of course, they're going to keep it in the dark. They're going to keep this quiet. Anyone that brings attention to it, they're going to slap on with censorship. And no one's going to be held to account. Not a single person.